Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Wise Owl Literary Soiree. I'm Rachna Singh, author and editor, The Wise Owl, a literary and art e-magazine. And today I will be in conversation with a very, very special guest, the renowned award-winning poet, writer, editor, and translator, Sudeep Sen. Welcome, Sudeep. We are all really looking forward to this conversation. And as you can see, we have a full house here. So many people have braved the scorching heat of a May afternoon to come and listen to you here. But before we dive into this conversation, I would like to request Dr. Ranjit Pawar, a former civil servant, author, and guest editor, The Wise Owl, to please introduce Sudeep Sen to our audience of book lovers. So over to you, Ranjit.
New generation voice in world literature and one of the finest English language poets in international literary scene. This is what the BBC says. He received the Pleiades Honor at the Stuka Poetry Festival Macedonia for having made a significant contribution to contemporary world poetry. Sudeep Sen's prize-winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems, Rain, The Dark, Arya, the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, Fractals, New and Selected Poems, Translations 1980 to 2015, Hero Text, Kathy Asmi Poems, Nazms and Anthropocene, Climate Change, Contagion, Consolation, awarded the Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize, Blue Nude, Ekphrases and New Poems was awarded the George Zanamia International Poetry Prize. I wonder how many were left which were not awarded.
Plenty.
Three cheers to that.
He's the editorial director of Our Cards and editor of Atlas, co-chair of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, inaugural artist in residence at the Moscow Camera, India, and the 2023 writer, artist in residence at the Nirox Foundation in Satyagraha House, South Africa. Sen is the first Asian honored to deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture and read his poetry at the Nobel Laureate Festival. The Government of India awarded him the Senior Fellowship for Outstanding Persons in the Field of Culture and Literature. Recently, he was awarded the Sanatan Puraskar 2024, celebrating his contribution and unwavering dedication and lifetime achievement in the field of literature. And I'm sure he has a lot of lifetime left yet. He's already got a Lifetime Achievement Award. Sen's works have been translated into over 25 languages. His works have appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, Newsweek, Guardian, Observer, Independent, Telegraph, Financial Times, Herald, Harvard Review, among others, and broadcast on BBC, CNN, NDTV, etc. His books, Whispering Anklets and Rogue, that completes his eco-trilogy, are forthcoming. All the best for that, and now over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Ranjit. Sudeep, that show is a bag full of prestigious literary awards, and we are indeed honored to host such a gifted poet today. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I promise you this is going to be a very, very interesting session. And once we conclude the conversation, we'll throw open the session for questions by the audience. So let's get the conversational ball rolling here. As this is going to be an evening of and about poetry and the creativity that goes into writing poetry, I thought let's set the mood of the evening with a poetic rendition by Sudeep Sen himself. So what would you like to read out for us, Sudeep?
First of all, thank you very, very much for coming. It's really hot and you look so calm and collected. I don't know how you do this. It was a struggle to, get here. But it's also home for me. Chandigarh is, I was being quizzed by this very handsome gentleman right in front of me. And he asked me several personal questions, one of which I had to answer very truthfully, that my better half is a Sikhni from this city. Parents live here, so I'm very, very familiar with the city and your state and your language. And to my utter astonishment and terror, a couple of years ago, the selected poems of my English came out in Punjabi by one of your best publishers in Punjab. And the foreword has been written, sadly now he's just died, Surjit Pathak, who was a big mentor for me. And the afterword has been written by Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary, the playwright and the director. So I'll get this out of the way because I can't read Punjabi at all. I do understand it very well. So you can't say anything behind my back. So this is my newest book. It's called Anthropocene. And it's there's some copies out there which I'm happy to sign at the end. And this I wrote completely accidentally during the pandemic, like a lot of us, most of us around the world were in a state of lockdown. Certainly not for long stretches, but certainly 3 months, 6 months, depending on where you were. And a lot of people started complaining, what do we do? It's lonely, isolation, and so on. And for me, it was completely normal because as a poet, as a writer, more often than not, I do stay in isolation. It's a very standard, normal state of being. It's just that when the lockdown happened, everybody started praising it and made it normal, something that was not normal for them. So it was written in that context. It wasn't a book I was planning to write. I was in fact writing the book called The Whispering Anklet, which you just mentioned in the introduction. And The Whispering Anklet is really my dear, dear project. The Whispering Anklet is my 40 years of obsession with classical Indian music and dance. So Whispering Anklet is basically Payal. And it's a set of ekphrasis poems that are either inspired by dance, dancers, music, aspects of any of that, one or the other. It's like the pandemic. The pandemic hit that particular manuscript. It got COVID, so that's been stalled. It needs a few boosters and a few more injections for it to be revived. But I drew on the situation around me and this book happened. So let me just read out a few poems from this. This one is called Disembodied. And it's set in my home city of Delhi, which is where I'm born and brought up. And there's not much to explain. It's really about the city, but it could be about any big city around the world. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak, my lungs fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe, where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessing, but its contour, artificial shape shaped by Nautilus, skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains, skeleton strength not shaped by earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left, or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Absolutely lovely imagery there.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind. Can I ask 3 people to just come and fill up my front row of teeth, because I need fillings otherwise, because it's full, but the first 3 chairs are staring at me with great loneliness.
So please.
Yes. You can take the bag down if you wish. Yes. Oh, that's better. Maybe one more person can come there. Who's the most handsome man because these days you can't say who's the most beautiful woman, because God knows it's politically incorrect. God knows, I don't know. The world has become really weird. कुछ भी चलेगा?
कुछ भी चलेगा.
आप बैठिए फिर यहाँ. Let me read the very first poem in the book. It's a very, very short poem. It's called That Is, spelt I.E. Looks like this. It's a poem that I wrote for my son, one of many that I've written for him. Of course, children tend to be too blasé, that is, oh, Baba, not one more poem, you know? Just like wives tend to do. If you don't write about them, they'll complain. If you write too much, then they don't even bother about it. So anyway, thankfully my son's not in the audience, because I'm happy. I talk about him way too much. Again, it was written during that same pandemic time, the time of the lockdown. And I don't know what happened to me, but I actually, after I wrote the poem, I sent a copy of the poem to my son. Of course, no response for a good few weeks. Then he texts me with emoticons and so on, saying, Baba, actually, it's a rather beautiful poem. Which shocked me that he had first responded with a clean grammatical sentence. But he did say that I have no idea what you're talking about. So then I said, okay, theek hai, mera hi beta hai. That is because you hear the sound of a lone rustling leaf. You hear the sea. That is because I consider the sea silent. You hear its silence in my studio. that is, and because of that, the silence will not empty the sea of its leaves. This one is called Hope, Light Leaks. And it has a two-line epigraph from Martin Luther King Jr. And I will quote that, and I quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." But let me tell you a little backstory. I'm also a photographer, so with poetry, unlike prose, unlike many of the other kinds of vocations we have, things come to you suddenly, unexpectedly, moodily, growlingly, happily, lovingly. And the worst time it can possibly come is when you're in bed in the winters, Delhi winters, old-fashioned Delhi winters when there's no heating. So you're under a good razai, very comfy, and something strikes you, which happens quite often. Your partner is next to you. Now the decision is, do I go out, walk across all the cold floors, go to my study and write it down, or shall I wait until the next morning to please the person, because that's become kind of a habit, leaving her. Often what happens is, if you don't do it then, it's gone.
Forget.
You can recollect it, but it's just uska jo maza hai. So it's a question of choosing between two mistresses, the poesia or the sikhni. So this happened, and I got up and I went to the loo and I just shut the door, and I was making a decision as to whether to go to the office or go back to bed. And I went back to bed. Of course, women defeat you all the time, so I went back to bed. And I realized I had kept the light in the bathroom on and the door was slightly ajar. And then I took this photograph from bed. You can't quite see it from so far. You'll see it in the book when you see it. But the light that was leaking through the edges of the door kind of looked to me at the time like a broken crucifix. And it was an odd kind of thing to see. It was also at the time when George Floyd thing happened, Black Lives Matter, breathing is a difficulty and so on. So that's how poetry happens. All these strange things happen and it all comes together. Hope, light leaks. Late at night, light leaks, spilling beyond the door's rectangle edge. A cleaving schism, its shape a partial crucifix, a new resurrection. Light's plane waxes, wanes, viral load expands, contracts. Photons spill, conduction sparks. Light slow removes cataracts veil. In this blackness, lives matter. Let me read out a poem which is titled simply Language. Language, of course, is a tool. It's a tool for my trade, of course, without which I can't do anything. But it's also a weapon. It's how you can see all around us how language has been weaponized. Fake news, WhatsApp University, stuff that you see on the news which is completely propaganda, unverified news and so on. Spin doctors can actually determine the election results in America sitting in Russia, if you know the backstory of that many years ago. 2-3 financial institutions had to go down because of all the stuff that went on. So it's about all that. But that's the serious part of it. As a poet, one doesn't think of all these major things, Ultimately, poetry comes from the soul, Then the head takes over, and somewhere along the line, 3 months, 4 months later, after 20 drafts, the two marry, sometimes happily, sometimes they go for a divorce, which means they won't be in a book. This was a happy ending, which ended up as a full poem. Beyond all this, it's actually, there's a personal part to it, which is, it's an ode to my old typewriter. It's a manual typewriter, it's in gleaming condition. I'm really proud of it, like a military man who cleans the gun every day. It works, it's always on my table. The irony, of course, is to get it going, to source the silk red and black ribbon is more difficult than to, that is more expensive now to get, so that's the irony. Anyway, so that's the personal backstory. It's not important, but I thought these personal things are very important as well. Language, and I have an epigraph which precedes the poem by Italo Calvino, and I quote, "Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally." My typewriter is multilingual. Its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black red silk ribbons pools unwind as the carriage moves right to left. In cursive hand I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another, the translation seamless. Oracles, ventricles, pump blood. Corpuscle-like alphabets, phrases, syntax, cross-fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letter forms dance, ligatures pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Imagination isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language. Maybe I'll just read one more poem and then we can chat, and then if you were sufficiently moved, I can get back to poetry. This is a poem I wrote a while ago. It's called Kargil. So since there aren't any foreigners here, I would have sent Goras here. I don't have to give a huge backstory about India, Pakistan politics, 1947, Kargil, ye, wo. Everybody knows what's happening. So my son and I went on this 3-month road trip. We drove from Delhi all the way to Punjab, all the way up to Srinagar, across to Leh, Ladakh, and came via Kulu Manali and back. And we camped, we trekked, we hitchhiked, we did all sorts of things. It was just one of the most wonderful trips. He was this high. He was a boy at the time, and I'm not ashamed to say, he was playing with plastic guns and toys and plastic rubber bullets and plastic guns. I have no problem with that. I know modern parents have lots of issues with violence of certain kind. I mean, I think sport shooting is fantastic. Anyway, so Kargil was not on my itinerary, but because he was in that state of mind, he said, "Baba, let's go to Kargil, we'll find bullets and guns." And this is 10 years after the war. So of course you don't say no to your child. So of course we went to Kargil, spent a couple of days. He looked at me very sheepishly because by then it was an old outpost of a town, dusty, nothing happens. There's not even a Pizza Hut for him to go to. So he was very sheepish. But having said that, it's because of him that this poem emerged. So I said, thank you for taking me there. Kargil. It opens with a longish epigraph by one of my favorite poets, Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott won the Nobel Prize in 1992 for the book Omeros. Omeros is a play on Homer's Odyssey, Homer, and it's a kind of retelling of Homer's through the Caribbean lens. And it's a book-length poem, one poem over 300 pages. So this is a quote from that. Our street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain. 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons charred, abandoned brick, wood, cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores getting outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust, smoke screen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up, calculate their exact arc, and find instead a flawed theorem.
It's beautiful. What a beautiful rendition. And it's reminding me of Brecht's lines, he said, "In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times," which is what you just did for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Sudeep, here I would like to just kind of double click on your creative journey as a poet now. I'm sure our audience would love to know a little about the creative influences, the various creative triggers that molded you into the poet, the writer, the editor, the photographer, the translator that you are today. So tell us a little about that.
So to everybody's shock, I have to confess that I grew up in a very normal Indian family, a rather well-educated family which has its own problems. So what happens if you're born a male in an Indian context, and I'm not talking about now because men have so much more freedom and women have so much more freedom. If you're born a man at that time, you're expected to be a doctor or a lawyer, failing which economics and commerce is barely okay. Yeah, MBA is chalega. What did I want to do? English literature. So short of saying that I was of a different orientation, because I remember when I applied to Delhi University, the first list came out, there were 2 boys and 28 women. Of course, all my men friends told me that, "Sale, pata hai kyun ja raha hai?" It evened out. By the time the third and the fourth list came out, there were 40% boys and 60% girls. But I was a science student. Physics was my passion. I had to sit through the Agarwal's classes when sat for the IIT exams and got in. Architecture was a big interest of mine, so I got into the School of Architecture, School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, SPA. And then, as I do and I have done consistently all my life, decided against practicality and said I want to do English Lit. So of course the entire family got around. It was a morning shadi. Their relatives flew in. It was like a Punjabi wedding, except that it was very dark. They said, "Ab kya karoge? We'll buy you books. I know this is a poison, this, that, and the other. But what will you do?" At the time, academics were not paid well. Now it's a different matter. It's the UGC scale, and they're well paid. So I understood their grief. It was out of love that I will be on the streets or such like. This is what will you be doing? But anyway, I persisted. I just said, let me just do it. I had the last 3 years was like a holiday because all that I had to do was read novels. I mean, how easy is that? Anyway, one is doing it. We had 8 novels in the first year. All the novels I had read while I was in school anyway. So it was party time. So I was super happy. I could do anything I want. And I just told myself that, if all this fails, I can get a job in McDonald's if it existed. We're reasonably well educated. So anyway, with a pure science background, against the wishes of most people, I pursued literature. And the other parallel story is because I grew up in a Bengali family, there was a lot of poetry and music and dance in the family, and a lot of arguing. We are very gregarious like the Punjabis. We talk a lot, we fight a lot in a loving way, but when the fight is at its zenith, if a stranger comes in, they will not think that they are relatives or friends, but we show our love with. The more violent the cuss word is, the closer you are. So that was the other backdrop. So in a sense, poetry came very naturally to me because I heard a lot of poetry in the house. My parents knew poems by heart. My grandmother and my mother had a puja room where they would do the chanting and praying. So all that came in somewhere into my poetry. I remember I wrote a poem called Durga Puja. It's in my first or second book. And the entire verse structure is set in the same meter as the Chandi part or Chondi part, which is the prayer text from the where they chant, and it starts 10 days before the Durga Puja. So those kinds of things in an osmotic way have influenced my architecture and my poetry. A lot of my early poetry was very, very formal. You mentioned Rubai and sonnet and all that. But I've also extended the form, broken the form, because one of the things that a lot of young students tell me, and I do a lot, I teach both students and adults how to write poetry, how to write fiction, what is called creative writing in the West. It's ironic at one level that, a brown-skinned Bengali from Delhi has to go to America and England and teach Koras how to write English. That's a great joy anyway, a very childish joy, but it's quite nice actually to feel that so many Indian writers are doing so well, and the faculty is more Indian than Western. So all these things, parallelly has helped. Science is a very, very important aspect of my writing. This book is called Fractals, which is a scientific and mathematical term. And I don't think science and the arts are divorced at all. They're just two sides of the same coin. I think the way we teach youngsters and the way we upgrade science and commerce and economics over the arts is a problematic thing, because if you don't have humanities and the humanities studies in your life, you will be a poorer person. This is what gives us the finer things in life, the music, the art, the poetry, and so on and so forth. Both sides are important. So yeah, I'm just sort of rambling, but all these things were the influence. So I grew up liking Fairs Ahmed Fairs, William Wordsworth, Milton, all sorts of things. It would depend on my mood, whether I want to have papdi chaat or whether I want to have fine dining. Both are valid as far as I'm concerned.
So Sudeep, once when we spoke last time, you talked about how your grandfather encouraged you to sort of march down this creative path and helped you print your first book.
Oh,
So
I have
just
to.
tell us a little about that. Yeah.
My grandfather was a very strict man. I used to shudder next to him. He didn't encourage me about writing, not at all. I have to tell you that. He was trying to do everything else. He wanted me to join the military. So I also sat for the army exam. Part of my family has been in the military service. So Kargil was written partly also out of homage to all the soldiers in India. No. But it was only.
The first book you said.
No, so that was a nice, sweet, anti-grandfatherly gesture because what actually happened was when I finished my class 12, I'd written some poems, mostly unreadable stuff. But he very sweetly, maybe my mother had something to do with it, got them all, remember the word cyclostyle? Before Xerox. So he got it cyclostyle, I think 50 copies of them.
Okay.
And a local printer, it got cyclostyle, it didn't get printed, but it looked like print. And there was a local bindery not very far from our house. This wonderful, and there's a whole story to it. He's a Muslim person, quite poor. All he did was the leather binding and the stitching. Mostly they did binding of law books, with those gold stamps. So my grandfather took it there. So he said, he can. Poetry. And then he started reciting Urdu poetry from heart. I mean, it was the most astonishing thing how well read this binder was. So he said, no, this requires a special binding. So he bound 50 copies, and it was meant really to give to the family as present to just warn them that this is not the path he should be going down in. That was why my grandfather printed my first book. It's an unofficial book, it's never been out as such.
So I guess kudos to the binder rather than to your grandfather.
Totally, yeah. It was the binder who I would sit next to and listen to him singing ghazals. Beautiful.
Wonderful, yeah.
I became good friends with him. Yeah, very good friends with him.
Okay, Sudeep, so the next question. I'm extremely intrigued by the fact that you wear so many hats. I call them different diverse hats. You say no, it's one hat.
It's one hat with many holes.
Yeah. So, you're a poet, writer, editor, photographer, translator. You translated Kefi Azmi's Nazms into English, all of that. So, tell us, how do you juggle so many roles? And if I may ask, which is the role which is closest to your heart, which gives you the most creative satisfaction? Although I think I know what you're going to respond with. So do tell us.
The only thing that is important in my life is poetry, nothing else.
Yeah.
And it's a hard fact that my wife has to swallow as well. The fact that we've been together for 20 years means that she's a very strong woman. Because she knows my real lover and mistress is here. So she doesn't fight about this with me. So yeah, by miles it's poetry. All the other things I do is just an offshoot of writing, really. The hat, as I said, has so many holes. Because it needs to breathe. There's too many things going on in my head, so it needs to breathe. So I just puncture it. And then depending on my mood. You see, translation I got into because I love language, I love poetry. I just want, especially Hindi and Bengali poetry, the two languages I can read and write. I realized so little of it, especially abroad, has moved to that English-speaking world. Good poetry translated well. There is a lot of translation around, but when a poet, practicing poet in English translates a Hindi poem or a Punjabi poem or an English poem or a Bengali poem into English, we use a different kind of filter or a mechanism because you need to know the craft, you need to have the tools. A lot of the translations you read okay because they just tell you the story of the original poem. A lot of the rhythm is lost, a lot of the rhyme scheme is lost, a lot of the cadence and the mathematics is lost because poetry is complicated business,
Yeah.
Even though it seems very simple, there's so much of craft and architectural blocks that anchors a poem onto the surface that if you don't have those skills, then you're only translating, say, 1/10 of the poem, just the story. So that came as a sort of natural extension because I read so much, and I said, okay, let me just translate this. I have to tell you that I've also translated from languages I don't know. And you'd say, this is cheating. Yes, maybe so, but there's a long tradition of this in the world. How this happens is very simple. Say I go to a poetry festival, literature festival abroad, and usually there are 3 days or 5 days, and after a day or two, you make groups of 1 or 2 friends. One or two people you get along with, you stand your hand together because most of the people you don't know, so you form your little family. And so there was this Macedonian poet, for instance, in Israel at the time, in Jerusalem. This was well before all this nonsense. He and I were sitting, and he introduced me to his national drink, which is called rakia. It tastes foul when you first drink it, but it's just like whiskey as a young child, when you have whiskey for the first time, and look what happens at the end. You just take it as beautiful silk. The older you grow, the silkier it gets. So he introduced me this to Rocky, which tasted like mouthfloss first, but man, by the end of the week, I knew the nuances of this beautiful drink, which is in Eastern Europe. Through all this, I was interested in his poetry. He gave me very literal translations of his Macedonian poems to me into English. He's a professor of English, so his English is very good, but he can't write poetry in English. So we collaboratively translated his poems into English with his help. So I've done that with Icelandic friends and so on. The only time I don't do this, which is non-cheating way, is with Bangla, Hindi and Urdu. And Urdu, again, I read in the Devanagari script. I can't read the Urdu script, but that doesn't matter because everything is the same. So yeah, and then along the way, at Columbia, I did a degree in journalism, and my specialty was documentary film because I was always interested in photography. And then I did that. I was a filmmaker for a while. And now it's just really 2 sides of the same coin. It's poetry and photography. And all this is an extension, all this is a distraction. Sometimes it ends up as 2 or 3 books, but I have all the time in the world. I work so hard that I don't have any time, but I have so much time that I can do all these things. I just find it really difficult when people say we don't have time. We have 24 hours in a day. It's a lot of time if one wants to put it to good use. So it's possible. It's not as though that I'm unusual. There are other people who do much, much more than I do.
All right. So Sudeep, I
see you're exhausted. All right.
Oh my God, so much. So many roles, yeah.
As it is, it's hot. And then all the stuff.
So, but I read somewhere, you said, I didn't choose poetry, it chose me, which I thought was very appropriate for the kind of poetry that you're writing, because your métier obviously is poetry. So, I've had the pleasure of reading some of your poems, and I realized that you're writing in different poetic forms, You're writing in something like a rubai, you're writing sonnets, you're writing a triptych, Disembodied, I think was a triptych, and Creole also. And poetic chants, right? So tell us what makes you choose these different forms of poetry, and also maybe that would be the second question, the second part of my question. What are the challenges that you face when you switch from one poetic form to the other? I mean, from rubai to sonnet, it's a different rhyme scheme, it's a different kind of 4-line, rubai is a quatrain, I believe, sonnet, 14 lines, triptych is like 3 stanzas. So how do you manage that switch from one poetic form to the other?
So it's not a switch. Think of it as a classical piece of classical music. Poetry is nothing but classical poetry and classical dance and music exactly work on the same way. It's a question of whether it's the morning rag or the evening rag, or whether it's elongated, whether it's in deep tal, or
Whether it's a bada khyal or a chota
Yeah,
khyal.
so it's actually part of the same family. It's just various kinds of things within a larger family.
Right.
Most people are lazy, so they'll write what is called free verse.
Free verse, yeah.
And that's fine, there's no problem with it as long as the free verse is written well. Very early on, part of my interest came because I was just very used to listening to songs and people reciting poetry in my house. They just would. I just felt like a little ant how well read they were. It was just shocking. It was not an easy childhood. That they knew long poems by heart, not just in one language. Bangla mein bhi bolte hain. My mother would start off in English. My mother knew just Punjabi, so she would recite in Punjabi. How I don't know. Somehow. So all these beautiful rhythms get lodged in your brain at some point. And it's really through osmosis, and it's only when you are a bit more mature that you realize actually one should try it. And I've been very, very lucky to have mentors. I totally believe in the Guru Shishya Parampara because I've had some very good, strict mentors who forced me to write in form. And as a young writer, I was rebelling. I said, why write a sonnet? How is that relevant in India or to what I'm doing? And now I realize why. Because really, if you want to write good free verse, you need to know the grammar, you need to know the syntax, you need to know the bada khyal, chota khyal, all the classical meters. It's only once you master them that you can break them and experiment with them. But if you don't have that training or the basis, what are you breaking? You're really working in a vacuum. So I think it's very, very important to have that training, and I'm not saying this is a prescriptive thing or not. It was just a personal fascination. It's just the way when I got interested in classical music, initially I had no idea what it was. It was just because I've heard it a lot. And then just through hearing, I got seduced into the world of classical music. And then I started studying what these forms are. I can't sing, but at least when I go to a concert, I can tell what's happening. And even then, I realize I know so little because this ocean is vast. So it's not difficult. It's a challenge I took on, but it's like, let me give you an example of, say, Mohammad Azharuddin, our former captain. When he would flick the ball, the leg glance, Jeff Thompson is bowling at 90 miles per hour, it just would fall. One of the most difficult shots to do, but when he did it, it looked so silky and elegant. Why? Because he spent hundreds of years just doing that in the nets, in Hyderabad nets in the club, which is why so many of the readers. It's just simply that a lot of poetry, a lot of any form is riyaz. I sit down with poetry for 2 hours every day. Call me a madman, it is, because I should have better things to do in my life. It's not as though I can write a new poem, I wish I did. But if I can't, then I would read someone else's book of poetry. Since I teach, I'm reading a lot of poetry, I'm reviewing, I'm writing a lot. It's my own way to bring sanity to my life. And because I'm such a heathen, I don't pray, I have multiple gods or no gods. For the longest time, told my parents that this is my religion. So they said, okay, let me make a temple of poetry for them. At least that's one time he goes and prays. So it's a combination of all that, really. So I think it's very, very important to be trained classically. All the best pop musicians have been trained classically. It's a misnomer that you can just... Of course, there are certain people who have this amazing talent to sing very beautifully without any training. But even they, to go beyond a certain step, have to be trained. Because you need to know the grammar. Yeah. And poetry, by the way, uses the same grammar as fiction. So you can take a line, break it up into 5 parts, arrange it in a column, and because you have a nice laser printer, nice fonts, print it out, and you print it and say, wow, it looks so good. It's a malaise, actually. So you really need to know why a line is being broken and so on. Anyway, I don't want to be so technical, but the point is, if you can't spell or read ABCD, how are you going to even write a sentence? And that's what it is.
So Sudeep, while you were talking, there were a lot of questions sort of clamoring in my mind. about your creative process. I'm sure everybody in the audience would also have some similar questions. Let me try to articulate some of them. Do you have any rituals that you follow with your writing? Are you a method writer in the sense that do you decide on the form first and then maybe decide on the theme? Do you believe in a spontaneous overflow of emotions? Or I remember last time when we spoke, and even now you were mentioning that the architecture of the poem is very important for you. So how do you sort of seamlessly meld together the technique and spontaneity without losing the emotional dynamics and nuances of your poetry?
Which is the example I gave you earlier, simply that Riyaz, just practice.
More and more practice.
You see, the thing is, if a piece of text or a poem, when I read it, screams at me and tells me that, look how clever I am, or look how intelligent I am, I find that a very unattractive kind of proposition.
Right.
But if the poem leaps out and talks to me without any of those accoutrements, and then I get into the poem, I fall in love with the poem, and then the deeper I go, I realize how well it's crafted. That is what is very attractive.
Yeah, it has to
So
connect with your
it has to, the
artist.
brain and the heart and the body has to connect.
Yeah.
Otherwise it becomes disembodied
Yes,
poem I
true.
wrote.
Very true.
Some poems are so cerebral that they just don't rise above the page. Then the flip side is this sort of poetry on stage. Young man, cap turned this way, all that. I'm not putting anything down or up, but that often I hear people reading on the stage, and then I said, I really want to see how the poem looks because I want to read the poem again. Falls completely flat on the page because it's completely anarchic. A good poem should work both on the stage, both when it's read out, as well as without the aid of the poet or the reader, quietly, because most poetry we read in our private space. Think of it, the books on our bedside, the more permanent books are usually books of poems. And I mean it broadly. They could be a book of song, could be a prayer book, because they're all poems. Novels come and go because you read a novel and you put it back in the shelf. Rarely do you revisit a novel unless you're stuck in an English literature course and have to sit for exams like I had to do. I had to read the same novel thrice. But poetry, you dip in and dip out, you read one poem, you think about it, because each poem is like a novel. So it's a special space, like you said. Thankfully, you just made my life easier. He said it's the finest of all art forms. I said, beautiful, I love to hear that. But it is. It is the most elevated of all the art forms, which is why at one level it is so easy for people to connect. Like look at, the energy I can feel from your guys, all the eyes are just there. How often does it happen with poetry? It only can happen with poetry, no other thing. And when I say poetry, I would extend it to someone who's singing, because it's actually nothing but sung text. Dance is a performed text with music, and the basis of all dance is poetry. The tal and the bol, ta din ta tai ta ta din ta ta are just basically rhythm scales and beats.
So which brings me to another aspect of your writing, which I find very beautiful. I've noticed that in your poetry you incorporate rhythms, the rhythm of dance, the rhythm of music, the rhythm of everyday life. So that gives a very lyrical quality to your poetry. And I remember reading one of your poems, Bharatnatyam Dancer, which you dedicated to Leela Samson. And when I was reading it, I could actually hear and feel the tinkle of the anklets and the mudras, maybe the thump of the feet, So tell us a little about whether this, the fact that you incorporate these rhythms is like a conscious thing, it comes to you spontaneously, and if you could read out some poems that reflect these rhythms, that would be beautiful.
It's, I think, best answered if I read the poem out.
Yeah, sure.
Everything else is nonsense, Everything else is erudition, gyan.
Not required.
Not required.
Too much
असली चीज तो कविता है ना, और गाना है, दिल की बात है, जो we need our head to process it. Let me just read the poem, and then I'll try and be intelligent after that, if you insist. So it's Bharatanatyam dancer you were mentioning, right? So let me just find it. So it's part of this, as I said, dance, classical dance has been this poison of mine for the last 40 years. And this book, The Whispering Anchorage, should hopefully come out at the end of the year, if not next year. And this particular poem, I have to still find the poem, the page number, but the backstory is, I remember, I think I must have been 18 or 19 or something like that. I was in an auditorium and I saw this particular dancer on stage. I'm not going to name her because she's very famous, so I might get into a libelous situation. So there I was watching her, and of course I fell flat on my face. I was in love with her, which happens very easily to me. I fall in love very easily. I said, my God, look at this. A, she's gorgeous. B, she dances so well. Then whatever she says is like pearls. Of course, it was a one-sided love affair, as always. I wrote this poem for her. She had no clue that I was writing this. Much, much later, I got to know her, and she's very elegant. She just doesn't talk about that. And I've given her a copy of the poem. Of course, she has it framed in her bedroom, not the living room. So what happened was, I wrote this poem, and it was the first 3-4 drafts was a big mess of words. And I was crafting it and so on. And every poem of mine goes through minimum of 30 or 40 drafts. It takes a good 3-4 months to finish a poem. And even then, after that, I throw 80% of my writing because if they don't make the cut, they need to go. If I could use the same formula with my children, they would be better brought up. I'm much more lenient to my children than my poems. 80% of them are out. If they don't make the grade, they can't be out. Somewhere along the line, I said, the base, when I'm editing, I read the poems out to myself. So when I was reading, say, draft 11 or 12, I'm forgetting which one. This particular tal and bol, which I mentioned, ta dhin ta tai thai ta, ta dhin ta tai thai ta, just kept ringing in my head. And I said, why is this happening? And I realized I could trace a little bit of that in draft 12 of the poem. So I said, if I can trace this, wouldn't it be a great challenge to invent a rhyme scheme which is A, B, A, C, C, A, A, B, A, C, C, A, which is ta din ta tai thai ta, ta din ta tai thai ta. Never has it been done in English literature. Now, of course, if you pick up a book of prosody, Bharatanatyam dance is given as a new form discovered by an Indian, and this happened because I fell in love. This is this gorgeous woman, obsession with architecture, rhythm, and so eventually that poem is in that structure because the dance was so strict. The poem had to be strict because of my great love for this woman. I shall read it now. And if you see it on the page, you won't see the rhythm. You won't see the rhymes. There are two kinds of rhymes that happen in poetry. One, the obvious one, is the end stop. Ends of the words are rhymed. Ta ta din ta ta. This is the obvious. This one, the rhyme scheme I use is what is called wraparound rhymes, where the lines stop in the middle of the line. So if you want to look at the line, you can actually see the end words rhyming, but when you read it, you don't stop there. Gerard Manley Hopkins, for instance, wrote in that particular form. It's a great way because it's one of those things that it doesn't scream out saying that, look how well I've rhymed it, it's perfect. It's only when you go deeper than you realize, my God, there's so much work that's been done. So that's... And I feel bad when I say all this because I don't want poetry to be complicated. It isn't. It's actually really, really something that comes from the skin, which is...
Straight from the heart, right?
No, the heart is one thing. The heart needs a lot of guidance as well.
Yeah.
If you just throw heart out there, then the poem doesn't work.
You need to meld both of them.
Yeah, you really have to. You really have to. Okay, 129. Okay. Because of my interest in dance, I've also spent a lot of times and many months of my life in different dance schools. I'm flat-footed. I can't dance So often these gurus who said, "Chalo, theek hai," someone's come who's so interested, come to learn. I said, "No, I just come to observe." And there's a reference. Reason I'm saying this is there's a reference to Kalakshetra. Kalakshetra is the Academy of Bharatanatyam dance, which was founded by Rukmani Arundale. It's in Chennai. So I was there for a month. Many of you may know this organization called SPICMACAY.
Yeah, of course.
So when I was in school and college, SPICMACAY had a huge role in terms of polluting my mind. Because they had this wonderful thing called LECDEM, lecture demonstrations. So all these great artists would come to our school or college, do a little bit of dance, stop, explain, then do again. It was wonderful because really, you really need to understand the nuances, and if nothing like the master telling you. Bharatanatyam dancer for XXX. Spaces in the electric air divide themselves in circular rhythms as the slender grace of your arms and bell-tied ankles describe a geometric topography, real, cosmic, one that once reverberated continually in a prescribed courtyard of an ancient temple in South India. As your eyelids flit and flirt and match the subtle abhinay in a flutter of eyelashes, the pupils create an unusual focus. Sight, only ciliary muscles, blessed and cloaked in celestial kajal, could possibly enact. The raw brightness of Kanjivaram silk, of your breath, and the nobility of antique silver adorns you and your dance, reminding us of the treasure chest that is only half exposed, disclosed just enough, barely. For art, in its purest form, never reveals all. Even after the arc lights have long faded, the audience, now invisible, has stayed over. Here I can still see your pirouettes, frozen as time-lapse exposures. Feel the murmuring shadow of an accompanist's intricate rag in this theater of darkness. A darkness where oblique memories of my quiet Kalakshetra days filter, matching your very own of another time, where darkness itself is sleeping light, light that merges, reshapes, and ignites, dancing delicately in the half-light. But it is this sacred darkness that endures, melting light with desire, desire that simmers and sparks the radiance of your quiet femininity, as the female dancer now illuminates everything visible, clear, poetic, passionate, and ice pure.
So Sudeep, I'm sure none of us want the conversation to end, but time seems to be flying. So one last question before I conclude the conversation. A lot of us believe, I'm not one of them of course, that interest in serious poetry and literature seems to be dwindling, especially among the younger generation. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know whether that's true, because the phrasing assumes that the older generation is superior. So you as the older generation is assuming that the younger generation is not reading that much. I think a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my seniors have stopped reading 2,000 years ago. I don't know when the last book was read. It's very easy for me to find out in a cocktail party situation, because people are very clever these days, you see. They'll read half a review in the newspaper, NDTV bhi dekh liya, 2-3 lines from the book jacket they've read. Enough for a cocktail party, right? So you meet someone at the cocktail party and they'll talk about a book for the first 5 minutes and wow, man, impressive, read the book and so on. Then you ask a leading question. Minute 7, you realize the person hasn't read the book. They say, hey, listen, I have a call to take. Do you want another drink, So bad question because, most people have stopped reading. Forget the younger generation, our generation, the older generation. Apart from a small select few, reading is not a habit. So who are we even blaming? So it's a malaise across the generations. Now, having said that, a lot more young people read, not necessarily. See, serious literature and pulp literature, I don't make demarcations because it's very mood-based, isn't it? I've read James Hadley Chase and Alistair MacLean and Dickens and James Joyce. All this has made it richer for me. If I only read serious literature, what a bore I would be, I mean, come on. Enid Blyton was great fun when I was young, So everything, Amar Chitra Katha, all that, everything, just like, A.R. Rahman or, pop music from Bollywood is equally important. It's so mood-based. You can't just sort of say, okay, my primary interest when I'm sort of thinking about things, I would gravitate towards classical music or jazz or so on. But I love Kishore Kumar. I love Mithun Chakrabarti and his bad dancing. They're great, I think. So the important thing is you do not create a hierarchy. If you're efficient and good in whatever little space you're in, that's good enough. Now it's a question of high art and low art, who's deciding. But you decide because certain things are more difficult. It requires more time commitment. Now, is classical music difficult to hear? No, it's very tuneful, it's beautiful. You come out in a trance. I mean, the biggest, my wife is not here because she gives me a big cane because this is the example I give. After I watch a good classical dance performance, if it's really good, I come out of the hall floating. And I'm going to use the word because he said, "Yahan sab kuch chalta hai." I said, it is better than an orgasm. Any day. And so many orgasms, like how many times this floating thing happens? Not much in life generally, but if you go to 5 concerts in your life, 5 times, it's pretty good.
True, absolutely.
So, so it's a question of taste, it's a question of mood. You can't put it in a cycle.
Right.
But if you're engaged with it, I think there are a lot of people who read deeply, listen deeply, hear deeply. The problem with our world now is people have stopped listening. Everybody has an opinion, they are strident, but they will never listen. The art of listening is gone.
Yes, that's
and that is where we are suffering.
So in fact, I was at the Jaipur Lit Fest this time and I was pleasantly surprised because we had a lot of youngsters there taking part in the sessions, and not just because it seemed like a cool thing to do, but they were asking insightful questions. They were standing in queues for hours, to pick up a book from the bookstore and getting it signed. It's another matter that they were more interested in lessons in chemistry by Gammas.
That's all right.
But
and it depends on who the author is. Sometimes there are long lines because it's a very, very attractive actress who's written a bad book, but they'll want a signature and a selfie. Or with Sashi Tharoor, anyway, there'll be long lines because women of all categories, shapes, sizes, ages will queue. Some men queue as well. So, it all depends on, and it's okay. It's okay. Some people just buy the book as an object because they've got it signed and they can put it on their coffee table book. The others buy it because they want to read it in the private space. Both are valid. There's no problem with it, The fact is, if you're engaged with this, if you're going to a literature festival, paying a lot of money, and actually listening to these authors, that itself is something. And a lot of school kids and college kids are there. I mean, I actually hear because of the seminar tomorrow at the Punjab University, I'm only going to be reading and talking to students. And the kind of interest they have. I mean, I sell a lot of books in these spaces, and I'm surprised if I wear your hat saying, these young people are not reading. It's not true. It's not true. I learn a lot from them. But we have to be more generous and kind and accepting.
So I guess we should say that the literary heart of the world is
Beating alive,
and
totally.
pulsating and vibrant.
And you can see,
teachers
look
to
at the
that,
number of
yeah.
people who brave the heat. If I were you, I wouldn't be here. 5 o'clock in the heat to listen to some stupid poetry. My God! Clearly, it basically sums up what you said.
Yes,
There are
absolutely.
people interested,
Yes.
And thank you all for coming. It's been lovely to see your faces because each one gave me a lot of private energy. Each one, whenever I look and I could see a particular expression in someone, so beautiful.
So over
So
to
I'm
the audience.
happy to-
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, sure.
I want to ask something.
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
yes, of
we can
course.
take the mic. Take mic.
I will tell that gentleman.
What is this reason?
No, it's being recorded. She's recording, so it'll be good to have the.
So he's loud enough to be heard.
No,
I'm sure.
let's get the mic.
Will you permit me to guess the name of the dancer?
You can guess it. I'm not.
Choices.
You
Three options.
can guess. You can keep guessing, but I won't say whether it's right or wrong. But do guess. Let me see where your head is
It
worried.
starts with L. L.
I don't know.
No cues coming from here.
I ain't telling.
So any more questions? Please.
Man with the hat. Yeah. Someone should be passing
बेटा
the
अंदर
mic.
एक माइक दीजिए आप उनको ना.
Mic, please. Just. I will tell you after a few drinks.
So my question is somewhat related to the last question Ma'am Rachna Singh asked. And in just on younger generation, kind of poetry and photography and all that. So how do you feel that this can be taken as a profession? What you have been doing all these years? Because at the end of the day, we need a living.
True.
So do you think this is entirely a profession of which one can live on?
Such rude questions people
It
ask.
is. I know. I was going to use this word in the beginning, but I wondered that it should be a problem.
I'm blatant and I'm straightforward. It's just that you stood up elegantly dressed and lied your way through. Lots of masala, but
When I wrote the book, people asked me how many copies you have sold.
again a bad question.
Yeah. So I told them I've written the book not for the selling, but I will tell my story to the rest of the world.
Right.
That was my.
So I'll answer your question.
So in your case, you have written so much of poetry and so much of photography and all that. So how do you feel you make your living out of this? This is my question.
Allah ki this is a question I'll ask you. I'll ask. I will answer it very bluntly, but I need to answer it in 3 phases, 3 short phases. When you start out, you can't make a living out of writing. When you're in your middle career, you can't make a living. If you make it, it's possible to make a living from writing. Now, when I say writing, it's not just poetry. It's because I've written poetry for a long time, I have 30 books out of various shapes and sizes, that universities invite me, pay me, literature festivals invite me, pay me. I have a fee that I charge. I have an agent who runs my life. She lives in London. So all the international engagements I would do, it's a very structured, organized thing, just like classical music and dance. Yes, the only danger is I don't have a monthly salary. I have a yearly income, which is variable. So depending on the year.
Should be very motivating for all the upcoming poets.
I'll ask a supplementary question. Like, many people go to Bollywood to test their faith, but many of them fail only because they don't have the second, living to live on.
See, it's a question of aspiration. If you have a Bollywood aspiration, one should focus on Bollywood.
Everything is Bollywood. Like whatever you have, you're aspiring for, that is Bollywood.
No, not at all.
No,
I disagree.
Sir, my question is different in the sense that when you are aspiring for a career, like many people try for IAS, IPS.
So I didn't finish answering the question. Can I answer the first question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm still aspiring. I'm a long way from finishing. अभी तो मैं सीख रहा हूँ, अब तो मजा आ रहा है मेरे को. नहीं, let me just be.
No, sir, that way everybody is learning.
No, I'm not saying it out of answering to your
My
question.
simple question is that whether one can go into this, plunge into this kind of exercise.
So I would
not having any other source of income.
I would say there are 3 phases to one's career. I wouldn't jump into it as a sole career if you're in the beginning part of your
So
career.
that is the one reason, sir. My question is remotely connected to what ma'am asked the last question. Why youngsters are not going into this? Only
But youngsters are going.
There is again two videos.
Yeah, I meet a lot of youngsters. I go to schools and colleges all the time, and they are going. There's Indian poetry right now is very, very flourishing. I've done 2 big anthologies. Rachna can give you, the links to that. One is the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry. It's all about Indian poetry. It's a big fat book. You'll just be amazed at seeing the quality of Indian poetry that's going on. So a lot of people are writing.
It means, sir, that everybody who is aspiring to be a poet or a photographer or an artist or a performer or a dancer should come to that level to which you have reached, or they should, how will everyone make a space like you have done?
I can't answer for everyone.
So this is the question that is why people are not entering into this world. That is my question.
नहीं, आप गलत हैं. But ठीक है.
Any other
I
question?
respect
We
you.
have some people.
Yes.
Right, Mr. Miglani, Inderji, please दीजिए उनको. Miglani साहब को दीजिए. Mic दीजिए.
And don't worry, I will answer your question at a greater length after a couple of drinks.
Like we spoke in the beginning,
Mike.
I told you that I heard of you, but haven't met you.
On.
Hold it close to your hand.
So this brief exposure of
It is, it's working.
sorry. So this brief exposure does show that there is a delicacy of expression in your poems. There is a soft sensibility that surfaces very often. So I was wondering that how does it really live in or converge with the commitment that you have for a subject like climate change, the rigors that it would warrant, and the frustrations that you encounter? Would that kind of inhibit you from pursuing that? And how do you mix the two things together?
Okay.
Secondly, there have been some questions on the persons you met, the effect they had on you, and the outpouring of poem which was born out of that interaction that you had.
Which one? Oh, that's only one of many. I've broken my heart so many times.
I understand your entirely, and then the husband.
No. I've broken other people's heart too. Carry on, sir.
So the question is that when you have that kind of proclivity in mind,
Yes.
of art,
Yeah.
and at the same time you contend with some serious issues,
Yeah.
which perhaps are the most formidable that humanity faces today, how do you again
Yeah. Okay.
harmonize the two apparently paradoxical streams?
Yeah. So the word you use, the phrase you use, apparently paradoxical, is exactly the key to the answer to your question. I'll just give you an episode, a story, which will answer your question. I was a young poet, maybe I was 20. We have some silence, please. Yes, thank you. So I was, I think, 26, 27. I had just done my 3rd book. And when you're in your 20s, you are so cocky, so confident. If things are going well, completely misguided about delusions of grandeur is the phrase that comes, which most people suffer from generally anyway. So I remember I went to Dom Moraes' house. This was in Bombay. He was one of our senior poets. I was there with 3 young poets went, and he was a very generous man. I've had lovely mentors. So come, have some khana. lots of conversation, many bottles of whiskey down by the time it's 1 o'clock. And all I wanted to do was to give him my book and ask him, what did you think of it? But of course, you're well brought up, so you can't say that. Finally, as I was leaving, and this is book number 3, as I was leaving, I said, Dom, what did you think of the book? And he just told me one thing. I missed the vulnerability that was in your second book. At the time, I didn't understand what he said. I came out stomping, 3 of us, threw the book on complete dramebaz, through the. I am in Bombay, so it has to be, Bollywood has to be there. Threw the book on the pavement. I said, what the hell, It's only 10, 15 years later, I realized I wasn't melding the two. I'd maybe become too technical, too cerebral in the quest for writing purer. It's only through time and experience and riyaz that you find that right balance. Think of a mixing board, in the sound studio. One big board with millions of knobs. Actually, there are only 3 things that you're calibrating: the bass, the treble, and the mid-range in any piece of music. But why do we need millions of knobs? Because there are so many calibrated sounds within that. What I was doing was one side and the other side. I didn't really, by 26, have the wherewithal to marry the two. In a way, it feels invisible when I read out the poem now. And that takes practice. It's just sheer practice and being obsessed about it. No problem.
Any more? Okay.
Let me just make use of this opportunity that the mic has offered me.
Yes.
I'm a little intrigued by the use of the word craft
Yes.
in the creative process. Because, in fact, you have just no favorite theory of mine. That unlike, say, music or dance, which also requires a lot of practice, only certain physical skills, literature or poetry doesn't make that really what you want.
It does.
That's what I thought. Till I heard you. And so that's one part, that is the creative part. Let me also focus on the part of appreciation. So I'm reminded of this movie, The Dead Poets Society.
Wonderful movie.
Absolutely.
He sort of throws out that structured approach to appreciating poetry. And then moves away from that formalized structure.
Yeah.
So, as a teacher, say, supposing you are trying to make your students appreciate a piece of poetry, develop a better connect with that. So, do you think some kind of a structure is needed, or how exactly do you do it?
So the only way you can seduce people towards poetry in a serious way is to not tell them to write in form and structure and riyaz. These are the words which you do not use. You first spend the first semester when I do, sometimes these courses are longer courses, 1 year long course. So first semester I would just have fun with my students. I would take them to a movie, I said respond to this. Go to a football match, respond to it. I would hardly ever do it in my classroom because it's the most boring place to do with a blackboard and all that. It'll be in the gardens, in the cafe. The first semester, but by then I would make them read and listen and do so much that they're already being getting into the structure, because we are also seriously discussing the film. What worked, what didn't work. Someone will say that frame didn't quite match the next particular, the characterization was not. You'll be surprised if someone is in college or school, they're already in tune with a lot of things without really knowing it. All you're doing is tricking them into the space of hard work. Once you have them on your side, it's easy. It's like a little dough. And then they themselves want to draw it. Once they reach the intermediate level and want to go to the next level, that's when you throw out the rules again. Because they know how to drive really well. They can drive at 90 miles per hour without an accident. Then it's a question of how do you weave in on a Formula One, how to take them up to the Formula One. So it's a whole systematized way of doing it. And I was lucky because my teachers I had a lot of fun with. You know, when they were not teaching me poetry, they were reading poetry out to me. You know, they were doing all sorts of fun things, and it just didn't feel like work. But at some point, once you take it on to do it seriously, and which is why this whole thing about making a living and this and that, you have to do it regularly, dedicatedly. I'm not saying that I can sit down and write a new poem. I can't. But I still have to sit down because it's part of the exercise. When you're talking about whether it's a physical exercise or not, if you read biographies of lots of writers, we have to engage in a lot of physical work too, because otherwise certain parts of our brains don't work. So it's very important for us to get up, walk around, sit down again, because we spend a lot of time sitting on the desk. Going for walks is very important. Taking many tea breaks, very important. Stretching is important. So there's a lot of physical activity that you have to still do, because you have to keep the body alert and the mind alert. So for any of this, for all the kind of forms, whether it's dance, music, or this thing, the core muscles or the core technique is this writing and the singing or the dancing. Everything else is yoga around it and life. Because life has to be led too. My son's going to school, I have to sit down and do homework, I have to go for my parent-teacher meeting. It's not very poetic, you see. So everything, I have to live life in a very mundane, dreary world. At the same time, have this time that is meaningful, beautiful. The only way that can happen is spend time with yourself in your room or wherever, just in your zone. And when I say riyaz, it's not a difficult thing. I have to meditate and do the Gayatri Mantra every day. It's not like that. It's just being around things that you enjoy. The books you haven't read. I almost always have music playing. I have a kettle in my room because I love tea. So it's a dance of various things. So once you've seduced your students, it's easy.
So the next question.
Yes.
A lot of hands going up.
I'll take you after this.
Hello. I have two questions. One is I recently was listening to one of your poems, The Gift of Light. And this is being sung by someone, I don't know the name, but very good person. And she has sung in a number of other forms of your poem. So did you anticipate that your poem would be rendered into songs something? How do you feel about it? That is my first question.
Can I answer that first? Yeah. I don't anticipate anything, because I write ultimately for myself, which is why I throw 80% of the stuff out, because 80% of it is probably mumbo jumbo or just pleasing myself. The 20% which remains is for people, because by then that piece is universalized. So when the book came out, Anthropocene, this lady from America, who I haven't yet met, the person who took 12 of my poems and made them into songs and poetry films. The album is out, it's on Spotify, you can get it. Finding the email these days is not difficult. So I get an email from her saying that I bought this book, I really enjoyed it, and is it okay if I take a couple of poems and make them into songs? Who in the right mind will say no? I'm sitting in Delhi, I said, I don't know this person. This person has written to me this generous long email asking me permission whether she can do 2 songs. I said, of course, yes. And all that. So she did it. I went back and forth. And then the only thing I told her was, do not destroy the poem, because sometimes I work with musicians, they'll take one line from here, one line from there, add some drum beats. They make a khichdi out of it. And that's fine, the song can sound good, but it doesn't do justice to a poem. So I said, you can only use it as a song if you retain the sacredness and the integrity of the actual poem. Do not tamper with it. So that was a challenge. It so happens that she is a poet herself. She's a singer, songwriter, fairly well known, I later realized. Her husband is a sound engineer, so they have a sound studio. So it was all done. They do it professionally. So, I'm thrilled. Of course I'm thrilled. It's such a gift. It's a gift of life. And what she did was very interesting because, the poems are in English. So she sings them in English. And of course, through email and WhatsApp, we've now talked. I've never met her yet. And I said, fine, this is nice, but you're taking, all the songs are getting very serious, I'm also a fun person. Why don't you sort of make some things more lively? So one was done as a rock song, one was done as jazz, one was done, so there were various. If you listen to all the different poems, it's her interpretation through a particular medium. So it's such an honor and a treat. I have worked with musicians. I do a lot of collaborative work with musicians and dancers. So it's a space I enjoy a lot because I learn a lot. Because if you're only with poets, you'll go crazy. The poets are the biggest bitches, by which I mean they will eat and drown each other out because everyone's trying to get ahead, like Indians, pull everybody down. So I stay away from poets. I read their work, but I stay away from them, except for one or two who I'm friends with. I get along more easily with dancers, musicians, bureaucrats, panwalas, cigarettewalas, everybody else but poets. So, and it makes my life richer, because I have much more to say than just pure poetry.
My second question, this is more mundane.
Okay.
A couple of months back, I read this one story by Roald Dahl, The Automatic Dramatizer.
Yes.
Where he envisions that there's a machine which will write books. And then all the...
Which is happening now.
Yeah.
AI.
Everybody is around the market, except that machine writes everything. So do you think that thing will happen with you guys on this? The ChatGPT and artificial intelligence?
So my view,
What are your views? How do you anticipate what
yeah. So it's purely my
next
view.
10 years?
It's purely my view. 50 years ago, a big pronouncement was made that the novel is dead because nobody was reading long form. It became short stories, movies, series. Has the novel died? No. V.S. Naipaul said it can never die. You're talking about options actually, because that time we had less entertainment options, so book was one of them. Just because there are more options doesn't mean the number of people who are reading seriously has become less. They are just more invisible, that's all it is. Now the question, I know what your question is. So can machine take over?
Yeah.
Similarly, a scientific or a computer program is not going to work unless a human being feeds all the data in. So without the intelligence of a human being, the computer can never be more intelligent. With a given set of data, a computer is more efficient than the human being. It's not more intelligent. Which is why the word AI, we need to deconstruct that. It is artificial intelligence. The real intelligence is HI, human intelligence. So if you're going to put AI over HI, then you're shortchanging yourself. AI will go forward, and it has its other uses. There are lots of clerical type of things which we can leave to machines, and that's good. Well, that's why robots in medical industry are great. Not, you don't need 10 doctors for one procedure. You need a specialist, and the rest can be done. Diagnostics can be done through machines. Things like that. So we should take it with a pinch of salt, see what is useful and what is not. So no. And AI is not going to produce a better poem than a good poet in the real world. No.
True, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
She had put up her hand. The person with the black dress.
Indrajit, do you want to continue this question session, or do we talk over cups of tea and cookies? Would you prefer that? Yeah. So instead of having a formal session,
maybe two questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So these last two questions, and then we talk over our kappa.
Not yet. No. Just speak. Just turn it on. Put it next to your mouth.
Volume thoda. Or maybe the range is not.
Okay, just speak.
Just turn.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here. It was a really fascinating session.
My pleasure. Thank you for staying on.
So my question is in relation to
That's what happens if you have too much poetry. Even the mics start protesting.
Protesting, yeah.
Sorry, go on. Okay, no, maybe you should use it. Man has generously come to you.
Yeah, so I believe that this question can be asked for almost any sort of art form.
Yeah.
It's related to your creative process. So, like you mentioned earlier, that I mean, you can change, and also it takes a lot of discipline to sit down every single day and to make yourself just sit on a desk and write poetry. But my question is in relation to when do you know how to stop? Because you can begin something, and then also through your training or through sometimes you feel a certain way, or you just have to get certain work out on the paper, and then you can also later on work on it rigorously and then make it into a poem, a form of poem, or you can indulge in all of that. When do you know how to stop? And is that something that you believe is something you know before you even begin your creative process, or is it something that you've been trained to do in terms of how you know how to conclusively, just put an end or put a stop to your creative piece of art?
So the answer to both your questions is actually, I don't know, because I have not been trained to tell to stop. Nobody's told me. It's a personal decision. I certainly don't know before my creativity where it's going. A lot of it is staying with the material. If you're talking about just time stoppages, whether you want to give 2 hours every day or it bleeds into 3 or 4 hours, that is something that you have to decide. Like, for instance, when you're writing a book, there are times I'm only doing that and nothing else. And, you have to have a supportive ecosystem around you to let you do that. Because when the books say get typeset and you're proofreading it, it's just clerical work of just minutely looking at text. It's boring, but you have to be focused. Not fun, but it has to be also done. So then I skip a lot of things. Maybe I'm not spending enough time with my family or going out or something. But that's an episodic thing. Otherwise, more or less, one can have a structure. But don't ever be hard on yourself. Like if I'm in my studio writing 2 hours and if I see something in the sky and I'm distracted, please be distracted. That's a huge source of inspiration. You have to break the rules when you think it's right, and it's a judgment that you have to take a call. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't work. Most often, it'll reward you. Instinct. I think instinct is very important. So yes, the overall rigor is very important. That, say, if I'm saying 2 hours per day, what if it's 1 hour one day and 3 hours another day? That's okay, that's fine, because different days are, But more or less, if you have a pattern that you want to get so much done, there's no other way but you have to sit on the damn seat and on the table and get it done. It just doesn't come to you. Someone's got to do it. So when someone says, "Oh, you're so prolific," so I said, "Yeah, that's why you've written just one book in 30 years and you're still complaining about why I can't get published, because you're sitting on your butt. You need to mail that to a publisher." But this man thinks so grandly about himself that he said, "Publishers आएंगे, मेरे drawer से लेके जाएंगे, मेरे को गाड़ी में लेके जाएंगे, they'll treat me like this lord and they'll publish my book." I mean, I don't know who it happens to. Maybe it happens to a Nobel laureate once they won the Nobel Prize. But then, so that's the thing. You have to put in your work. After that, there's a lot of luck, circumstance, talent, hard work.
So basically, you instinctually know how to stop or how to end a particular book.
Yeah. It's like, do you want to stop lovemaking? No. Unless someone complains. Do you want to stop listening to a record? Unless someone falls sick. You usually want to listen to the whole song. If you're completely taken, you want to listen to the whole record. It's up to you, right? And then the people around you know exactly when to, give. Having space is important. Is that personal space and respecting other people's space. And that's where the trick is.
Right. The very last question of the session.
The lady here.
Indrajit, DJ, यहाँ पे दीजिए बलवा साहब को.
Yeah, maybe you can.
Both of you can ask. I think you're sitting next to each other. You can divide your question.
Yeah. Okay. So
Oh, he was such a supportive partner.
On my behalf, he was happy.
God, she's a model lady.
I'm just curious to know, like, when you write poetry,
Yeah.
do you write for yourself or you have everything in mind? For example,
Yeah.
your Bharatanatyam, I'm just curious to know, when you wrote that poem,
Yeah.
that could be a special poem for us.
No, I didn't have a reader in mind or the person.
The person in mind.
No, I was obsessed with her because I was a young man looking at this woman on stage.
Do you want to write just to express your emotions, or you want to convey a message to her?
Just right, I didn't have the dare to even talk to her, let alone give her the poem. My God, I was 20, whatever. Many years later, since I am now older, better known, I gave it to her a good 15 years later than the poem was written. No, that's because there is a kind of mutual friendship and respect. So, no. You write, ultimately you write for yourself. And if it's good enough and you want others to read it, you let those little children you birthed out in the little world. The rest you lock. Because, it's not fair that someone actually buys your book and you haven't done your best. Everybody has their own limit. Like, it may not be the best thing you can possibly do, but your own best, you put your best foot forward and it's in the book. Someone has bought that book, they've paid $500, $600. The poetry doesn't belong to me anymore. It's theirs. It's a transactional, I'm sorry, it sounds very unpoetic. It's a transactional operation that has happened. The person has taken my signature, paid me money, and the book is there. The poems are theirs for them to burn, enjoy, throw it in the kabadi, or do whatever they want. I have no control over it. So I better control everything that happens before it, which is be honest, write it as best as you can. Then the chance of that particular poem or the book to stay longer will be possibly better.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to wrap up the Q&A session now. We'll continue the conversation over a cup of tea. But I have some very exciting news for you, for all the book lovers here, in fact. Sudeep Sen's book, Anthropocene, Climate Change, Contagion, Conservation, which he was reading out from, was originally published in 2021 as a hardcover edition. It was so well received that now Penguin has published the paperback edition as well, and Sudeep has generously accepted our request to release the paperback edition of the book here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's do the honors.
Sure.
I would request Mr. Shabiul Hussain, former judge of the Allahabad High Court and chairperson, Punjab PIT NDPS, to please join us to do the honors. I would also request Mr. Avinash Monane sir, former DGP Sikkim, to also join us. Mrs. Geetmala Monane, former Principal Chief Commissioner Income Tax, also to join us. And Manmohanji, do I see Manmohanji? Yeah? Manmohanji, please. He's a connoisseur of art and literature. So we would like him also to please join us and do the honors. Should we come here? Move ahead. So that
Let's go.
Either aa jate so that we get a better picture of that.
See, that's when you have a good organizer, she thinks of everything. Let's not do it there, we get a better picture here.
Please stand up. And maybe this is
Maybe I should hold a book.
you should, in fact.
Maybe I can give my phone and take a picture as well. Someone take a picture of all of us?
He's taking pictures, I'll share them with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, to Anthropocene, let's hope it sells like hotcakes.
Really, thank you. And thank you for being such a loving, kind audience.
Fabulous.
I mean, you exhausted me.
And you're still smiling. Kudos to you. I'm happy to sign some books if anybody wants.
We'd also like to honor Sudeep Sen, and I would request Mr. S.C. Agarwal to please honor him with a scarf. He's the former Chief Secretary, Punjab.
One question I have, and I have the privilege of standing next to you now.
If you just give me a moment so we finish the formalities, we need to present you with a memento also of our administration. So I would request Dr. Rachna Singh to please give a memento of our appreciation to Sudeep. He happens to be my better half. And
I know.
of almost civil service and
Punjab is full of good couples, clearly. Supportive couple.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This was a fabulous evening. You've been a fabulous audience. And please join us for tea and some snacks. Thank you so much for coming.
I'll be sitting there, so yeah.
What's your favorite raga?